Okay, welcome to another video. So following directly on from the recent video we did on Manjaro 21.0 Ornara featuring their KDE edition, today we're going to spend a little bit of time checking out the XFCE edition. So we're going to quickly read a little bit from the release announcement here. So with our XFCE edition we now have XFCE 4.16. The window manager received lots of updates and improvements again in the area of compositing and GLX. Support for fractional scaling was added to the display dialog, along with highlighting the preferred mode of a display with an asterisk and adding aspect ratios next to the resolutions. The settings manager has improved search and filter capabilities. Thunar file manager received a boatload of fixes and quite a few notable features, including pause for copy and move operations, support for queued file transfer and remembering view settings per directory, and support for transparency in GTK themes. So the ISO size for the XFCE version is 2.5 GB. So with that being said, let's jump into the live environment and get this installed. So we've just booted off of the ISO and we have a couple of options in what we're going to do with the drivers. So we could either boot with the open source drivers or boot with the proprietary drivers. I'm going to go ahead and boot straight into it with the open source drivers. Okay, so here we are in the live environment for XFCE. So let's go ahead and click install Manjaro to open the installer, which is of course Calamares across all of the versions of Manjaro. So that's got the language as British English, so we can go to the next step. So for our zone, we're going to go ahead and click right about there, which is for Europe, London. Next. Okay, so the keyboard layout by default is selected English UK for us, and let's just test out the layout in the box below to make sure everything is working as it should and go to the next step. So here we go for the disk partitioning. Now we're going to do it a little bit different to the recent video that we done with Manjaro's KDE and just get a little bit of a different feel for the swap to a file. So what we're going to do, the same as before, is go to the Drevo X1 SSD, select erase disk and let the installer create the partitions for us. And now we're going to configure our swap. So we can do a no swap, a swap no hibernate, which will create you a smallish size swap partition, or we can do a swap with hibernate, which will expand your swap partition to be large enough to suspend to disk for full hibernation. Or, like what we're going to do today, is you can do a swap to a file, which is going to do away with all of the partitions and create you a swap file in your root directory. So that's going to leave you with two partitions, one for your EFI partition, and then the rest is all assigned to your root partition with ext4 as the default file system. Next. Okay, user account time, so Tyler, and we're just going to call this one Manjaro. Type in our password, and again we're going to make a slight change from the previous one, so we're going to use the same password for the admin account, but we're not going to log in automatically. We're going to boot up straight into the login screen, and then we can check out how that's themed as well. So let's go next. So we've got a little summary here to make sure we've made no mistakes. Press install, and as soon as we do install now, the installation will begin. So I'll pause the video here and come back once it's finished. Okay, so our installation has complete, and that took no time at all, clocking in at around about 2 minutes on my machine. So what we're going to do is reboot and check out our freshly installed Manjaro featuring XFCE. Right, so we've just booted up for the first time, and here we are at our nicely themed login screen, which is of course Light DM. So it's got the panel at the bottom, and I think the theming it's using is Mattress C, but we'll check that out once we're at the desktop. So of course we've got a few more buttons here for the power. We have some accessibility options here, so for large or high contrast, and then we also have the environment of XFCE session and then the keyboard mapping. So what we're going to do is go ahead and log in, and then we'll start looking around. And here we are at the desktop. So before we start playing around with things, the first thing we're going to go ahead and do is just quickly run an update, because I'm pretty sure there'll be something that we need to go ahead and grab. So we're going to open up the PAMAC manager here and go straight over to updates. And we do indeed have a few packages that need updating, which are Firefox, Thunderbird and the Manjaro system, with a total download size of 127.9 MB. So I'll pause the video, let that update, and then we'll get back to it. Right, so we're all up to date and we should be good to go. So we'll briefly start with just going over the desktop and the implementation of XFCE. It's quite a nice, clean, simple and easy to use implementation of XFCE on Manjaro. So if we go into the About section, we can of course confirm that it is indeed XFCE 4.16, and we'll also jump into a terminal with Ctrl-Alt-T, which by default isn't bound to the free floating window, it's instead bound to the drop-down version of XFCE terminal, but that can easily be changed, which we will do in the keyboard shortcuts, because I prefer a sort of a floating window as opposed to a drop-down terminal. But while we're here, we're going to go uname and A, and then we can see that we are using the kernel version of 5.10.23-1. And also while we're in here, we're going to type in htop So we can see the RAM that we are using is 800 MB at the moment, and as you can see just below that we have quite a small swap file of about half a gig at 512 MB. So if we go into our Thunar and just go into our root folder, we can see where that swap file actually is, and it will be straight into your root folder. And as you can see, there is our swap file, and that's what is showing up when we look at HTOP. And anything that you run in the terminal for the drop down terminal will run in the background. So as you can see, HTOP is still there and running. So with that out of the way, let's take a little look around this desktop. So like we said, a nice and clean implementation of XFCE with a single panel layout with everything happening at the bottom of our screen. So if you just go to a right click and jump straight into the preferences, we can see how this has all been set up. So it's got a row size of 36, which is a little big for me. I'll probably drop that down a little bit, but for now it makes looking at things a bit easier for the video. Now in appearance, we do have a few options here. So under general, we have a dark mode toggle. So by default, as you can see, the sort of panel preferences window is all quite nice and light, but if we just press this toggle, it's then going to switch things over to the dark mode, and then pressing it again will then get us back to the light theme. And of course we can change the opacity and icon size as well as the background style. And now in items, starting with the left hand side of the screen, we have the application menu, which is a whisker. So whisker is your little application launcher, and you have your user account up top, as well as quick links to the settings manager, lock screen, switch user, and of course you log out. And while we're here, let's have a quick look at our lock screen. And here we are, our lock screen, again very nicely themed, so we're just going to log straight back into it and get back into our applications, and there we go. So there's panel preferences right where we left it. So as well as all of the buttons at the top, your main panel of applications is at the left with the categories to the right, as well as some favorites, recently used, and all. And then you have your search bar at the top, so you can search for anything, hit enter and launch those applications. For example, we can go fire, hit enter, and that's going to go ahead and open up your default web browser, which is of course the Firefox web browser. So let's close that off and keep moving. We then have our Windows buttons, which is of course your application. So if you click on your window button, you can then minimize it, and then clicking it again, you can then restore it. We then have our show desktop button, very simple stuff. Clicking that will minimize all applications, give you a nice clutter-free desktop, and then clicking it again will restore all of those applications that were previously minimized. We then have our status tray plugin. So here is where you're going to find things like your drop-down terminal. So as well as using Control-Alt-T as a keyboard shortcut, you can also just press this little drop-down terminal and it will do the same function, much like it does on the KDE edition of Manjaro. We then have our PAMAC manager here, and it will update, notify you of updates that are currently needed to be updated. And while we're in here, let's jump straight into the preferences and see what we can do with things like Snap and Flatpak support. So it does have Snap and Flatpak support out of the box, but unlike the KDE version, I don't think this ships with App Image Launcher, so we'll probably go ahead and install that as well. So let's close that for now and keep moving. We then of course have our connections, our clipboard manager for copying and pasting, and then we have the MSM notifier, and then our volume slider. So clicking that, we can then get the slider up, but we also have another function. So if you press like your third click, or for me that's going to be pressing my scroll wheel down, that will then mute or unmute depending on what it was prior. And then we have our date and time, and then our action buttons for things like log out, restart, shutdown, etc. So what we're going to do now is go through some of the applications, but we won't spend too much time here, because I don't think too much has really changed in this department since the last time we checked out XFCE or Manjaro, apart from of course maybe things being a bit more up to date. Right, first of all, let's make this a little bit larger using the little tag here and just dragging it a little bit upwards, and there we go. So we're going to start in accessories. So we have Catfish file search, we have our clipboard manager, we have ngrampa for the archive manager, we have calculator, we have GTK hash, HP device manager, we have Kvantum manager, and then we have light DM GTK greeter, which is how I sort of log out my login screen, and all of that good stuff is being themed. So as you can see here, the default theme is Majesty, so we got that right, and the icons it's using is Adapter Papyrus Maya, and the font is Cantorel Bold. Now it's just quite a cool little application, and lets you sort of customize the look and feel of your login screen, but I quite like the way they've done it by default, so I'm not really going to change too much here. But if we jump into panel, we can see how they've done the panel. So we've got the host name, spacer, accessibility, and the power menu, and then the Windows position, and then of course you can get into the miscellaneous. So let's close that off and keep moving. So what else have we got in accessories? We have the user guide. We then have mousepad, which is going to be your sort of default GUI text editor when you're using XFCE on Manjaro. Very simple stuff, and of course you do have a tabs interface, so pressing new will open it up in a new tab. So let's go ahead and close that, don't save, and keep it moving. Now just underneath mousepad we then have another notes kind of application, but this time it's like a sort of desktop post-it note. So if you open that up and then just say typing anything like testing, you can then move that around anywhere you want in your desktop, and you can also full screen it. But then pressing close, you then have a nice little indicator right about there for your notes, and then clicking that once more will then restore all of those notes that you have just closed. So what we're going to do is close that off now, and we're going to right click to remove it to get rid of those notes, and then keep it moving. So I don't know if there's too much extra stuff in accessories I really want to take a look at. Of course we have our screenshot tool, and is there anything else in here that I really want to see? We then have Task Manager, and of course Thunar is your default file manager, and there has been some new features and improvements in this most recent version of XFCE, which we'll spend a bit of time on checking out some of the more notable ones. But for now, let's close that off and keep moving. And we also had XF Burn at the very bottom, which is a CD and DVD burning application. So that's everything in accessories. Now in games you're going to find just the one application. So much like all of the other versions of Manjaro, it does come pre-installed with Steam out of the box, which makes life a bit easier for you to get up and running with gaming without any issues at all. And we'll probably test it out of a game of CSGO. It shouldn't have any issues there though, it run absolutely fine on their KDE edition. Graphics wise, we have G-Color 2, GIMP and View Noir for image viewing. I like that we do have GIMP installed out of the box. We didn't have that on their KDE edition, and GIMP is something that I use quite a lot, so it's nice to see it installed out of the box on their XFCE edition. So internet wise, we have the SSH and VNC server browsers. Your default web browser is of course Firefox. You then have HexChat, which I do believe is an IRC chat program, and then we have Pigeon. We then have Thunderbird as our default email client. Multimedia wise, we have Audacious from Music Player, we have Pulse Audio Volume Control, the V4L2 test and capture utilities, and then VLC Media Player for your sort of overall general media playback. Now we will do a media test, but combined with Audacious and VLC, you pretty much will be absolutely fine with whatever media files you want to go ahead and play. Office wise, I don't think we've got anything, no. So much like the KDE edition, we don't have any pre-installed Office suite of applications out of the box. So what we'll probably do is go ahead and go into the Manjaro Hello Welcome screen and use that to do a quick install of LibreOffice Fresh. But what we do have in here is the dictionary and QPDF view. So other, we have HP UI scan, and now in settings, here's where you're going to find most of your settings for XFCE, but of course you do also have the little one click there to get straight into your settings manager, which we'll go through in a moment as well. But as well as your XFCE settings, you'll also find things like Cavantum once more, Qt5 settings, etc. So what we're going to do now is jump into system and see what else we've got. So we have gparted for managing your partitions and creating and formatting partitions and all of that good stuff. We have htop installed out of the box, and we will reboot in a moment, see how much RAM we're using before we make any changes. And we have our task manager and time shift. So what we're going to do with time shift is very quickly create a snapshot using rsync, because we haven't got Btrfs as the file system, and also give us a safe place to sort of roll back to in case we need to make any changes if we sort of encounter any issues. So we're going to go next. We're going to leave it on the daily interval for snapshots and go next, finish, and here we're going to take our first snapshot. Now it will take a minute or two, so I'll pause the video here and we'll come back once that's finished. Right, so our first snapshot has been taken successfully with rsync. So what we're going to do now is do a reboot, check how much RAM we're using, and then we'll start playing around with some things. Okay, so we've just booted back up and we are using 723 22 MB of RAM on a fresh boot, which isn't too dissimilar from the KDE edition, so not super light or anything, but when you consider it's a fully fledged desktop distribution with all of the applications you'd need, apart from an Office suite of applications, that's not too bad going. So let's close that off for now, and what we're going to do is spend a little bit of time going through the settings manager. So we're going to open up our whisker menu and go straight to settings manager. So we have the little search button here, so if we click this and search for a keyword, so for example we'll go for workspaces. So as you can see, it's not only going to find the workspaces, but it's also going to find any setting that's got the word workspaces in it. So for example, in Windows Manager we have the workspaces right here. Now by default you will have the scroll wheel option function that's going to change your workspaces. I don't much like that, so I'm going to go ahead and disable that, and now when you use your scroll wheel on your desktop, nothing should really happen. And while we're here, let's go into our workspace settings and go straight into settings and just bump it up 2 more, so we've got 4. And there we go. And of course, with your workspace little indicator here, you can drag and drop all your applications to different workspaces, and it's going to move them along to the next workspace. Now as default, your keyboard shortcut will be Control Alt and then the directionals to then go across to your different workspace. And of course you can get your little application window, and if you was to just drag it to the end of your screen and keep going, it's going to take you to the next workspace, and that is on like a constant cycle or loop. So once you get to the sort of end of the row, it's then going to start you back and then keep going. So let's get all the way back to our first workspace, and there we go. Now as well as dragging it to the side to do workspace switching, you can also, if you position it right, then get it to go to tiling mode and do it on your left and right side. Now I don't think they have a keyboard shortcut out of the box for this, but we'll go ahead and do that in just a second. So let's now go back to all settings, and what we're going to do is jump straight into the appearance. So theming wise, your default theme is the light matcher C, which is quite nice, and if we open up our Thunar file manager, let's have a quick look at what some of these other themes look like. So if we go to matcher dark C, there is the dark variation, and let's also check out the matcher dark azul. And then that's going to change the color ever so slightly, and the accent color is blue. And then the Liz is going to change it once more, and then your accent color is an orangey color. What we're going to do is leave it on the default matcher C. Now icons wise, we are using Papyrus Maya, but it's got all of the other Papyrus sort of variation theming. And then we have Adwater, ePapyrus, Gnome and High Contrast. Fonts wise, I think we're using the same as what they might have had on their KDE edition, which was Noto Sans, and it is indeed our default font with the monospace font of regular. Now let's go back into the settings and then have a look at a few more things, and then we'll test out some of the new features of Thunar. So of course we can jump straight into the Windows Manager and Windows Manager tweaks, and what we're going to do is start off with going into Window Manager, and of course you can change more of the theming here, which is going to change the sort of title bar theming as well. So what I'm going to do is install my favorite theme of Arc, and then once I've done that I'll have to come into here as well as the appearance package and change it there as well. But while we're in here, we're going to go all the way down to the tiling and then see what options we have. Right, so we do have all of the options for the tiling, but we don't actually have any keyboard shortcuts by default. Now your left super key is assigned to your whisker menu, but I do believe we still can assign this with left super and right, and it should work and not conflict with our whisker shortcuts. Let's give that a go. So now if we go super left, super right, we can now tile our application windows to the left or right using that shortcut key. Okay, and then what I want to do is go into Window Manager tweaks. So like I said, what I'm also going to do is go into Compositor, and it doesn't matter so much for now, but I am going to install a dock, so we're going to remove that for now. And then once that's done, it means that we won't get no weird sort of line effect once we've got dock plank running as well as our panel. Now we're going to go back into all settings, and if we scroll down to display, we can check out some of the new options we have here as well. So in the general tab, if we go straight to resolution, you'll notice that we have a little asterisk next to 1920 by 1080, which is telling us of the preferred resolution. And if we just expand that to check out all of the resolutions, you'll notice we can also see the aspect ratio next to that resolution, which makes things a little bit easier. Now just under that we have the scaling options, and we can go 1.1, 1.5 to 2, or we can set our custom scaling using custom. Now we're going to go back, and there's one more thing I do want to do while we're in here. So we're going to go down all the way to keyboard, which is right about there. And like I said with the shortcut for the drop down terminal, here's where we're going to change that just to the normal XFCE4 terminal window. So here in application shortcuts, if we look for XFCE terminal drop down, which is right there, all we need to do is remove everything after terminal, so this little drop down flag, and then it's going to open it up in a standard window. So now if we press Ctrl Alt T, we now have a normal floating window. But if we still wanted the drop down terminal, we always have the option of clicking the button down there, so you get the best of both worlds. Okay, so I think that's all I really wanted to check out in the settings for now. We might need to come back to it, but also you can of course do your firewall configuration, which is a very simple firewall sort of window that you're all probably used to, with your profile, status, deny, allow, and then your rules, report and logging. So let's close that off, and now what I want to do is spend a little bit of time checking out Thunar. Okay, so we've opened up two Thunar windows, and in one of them I've plugged in my external SSD, which I use for most of these videos, which is formatted in the exFAT file system, so it's found and mounted that absolutely fine. So what we're going to do is jump straight into videos in our home folder, and we're going to test out some file transfers using the pause function, and we'll try and queue some up as well. So starting with Fedora 34.mp4, we're just going to simply go copy, and we're going to go to paste it into this window, and then once this loads up, as you can see, we have the option to pause. So we're going to pause that, get another copy ready to go. We're then going to resume that, and then we're going to paste that straight away, and it won't start copying it. You'll notice it's frozen by another job on the same device. And then once this transfer is finished, it's automatically going to start that one, and then that's going to copy it over as well. Now it doesn't mean that you can't just copy things over all at the same time. So if you go to copy the KDE folder, go to paste, and now that's copying. If we just resume that at the same time, it's then going to copy them both over as well. So there we go. It's quite a cool little function, and it does make transferring and managing files a bit easier. And if you want to sort of prioritize one transfer over another, you do have that option. So what we can also do with Thunar, I do believe that we can now have independent sort of views for each directory. So what we're going to do is we're in the file manager preferences, and under show thumbnails we have remember view settings for each folder. So select this option to remember view type, sort column and sort order individually for each folder. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's close that off now. So we're currently in the SSD folder. Let's go to our home folder. So we're in the default view. So what we're going to do is go to view, and we're going to change it from icon view to list view. Now we're going to go to a different folder and then go back to there. So that's now still in that view. So what we're going to do now is go into documents and see what happens here. So we're going to create a few folders, and we're just going to copy and paste a few. So we're going to go Control V, 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 V. So what we're now going to do is change the view. So I can see that it's already worked because we're no longer in list view, we're in icon view once more. So we're going to go to compact view, and now we're going to go back to our home folder. So that's list view, and we're going to go back into documents, and now we're in the compact view, and we'll try it one more way using the icon view. And now we're going to go back into our home folder, back into documents, and there we can see it's got the independent view options for each directory, and that's pretty cool as well. So let's close that off and do some media tests. So now we're in SSD. We're going to test it out just by double clicking and see what it opens up as in the default application. So we can safely assume that Fedora 34 will open up in VLC. So let's just quickly make sure we are muted. And there we go, so it has indeed opened it up in VLC, so all of your media files should play pretty nicely and view videos inside VLC without any issues out of the box. And we're now going to do the same for an MP3, so I think this should open up in Audacious with a simple double click from our file manager. And there we go, so media playback is working absolutely fine, combining Audacious with VLC media player. Of course, if you wanted to change any of the default applications or file associations, you can go here. So under internet, web browser is Mozilla Firefox, mail reader is Thunderbird, utilities, Thunar is your file manager, your terminal emulator is XFCE, and then here in others you can change the sort of file associations with which applications you want them to open up with. So let's close this off now and keep moving. So as you can see, we've got VLC there, and let's just close that off. And now what I want to do is install a few more applications and see how we can get some Flatpak stuff all working, and we might even install the app image launcher. Okay, let's install some applications and make a few minor changes to our desktop. So we're going to search for the first one being app image launcher, which is pre-installed in their KDE version but isn't installed in their XFCE version. And we're also going to go ahead and grab the Arc GTK theme. And I'm going to use Flatpak to install Kdenlive to edit today's video, but we haven't actually enabled that yet, have we? Let's go into preferences quickly, type in our password and enable the Flatpak. Now we might still need to add the FlatHub repository, but we'll get to that in just a moment. So let's close that off, and for now we're going to apply these. Have I got Plank? Let's also get Plank. And then we're going to apply these, and I'll come back to it once it's finished, and we'll make a few changes to our desktop and then try out a game of CSGO, and then we'll wrap it up with some final thoughts. Okay, so I'm back, and I've made a few minor changes but nothing too crazy. All I've done is move the panel to the top, removing the Windows buttons, as we now have a dock at the bottom using Plank, and I've installed the Shade theme along with the Arc GTK theme to make everything look quite nice and uniformed. Now I was going to go ahead and install the Flatpak version of Kdenlive, but as we installed the app image launcher, I instead decided to opt for the app image version of Kdenlive and then let app image launcher integrate that for us into our system. What we're going to do now is try and test out a game of CSGO and make sure the frame rates are what we'd expect from this hardware, and then we'll start to wrap things up. Right, so we've just jumped into a random game of CSGO, and we're just going to sort of keep an eye on the frame rates for a few seconds and make sure it's not getting any weird dips or jitters, and it is round about what I would expect on this hardware. And so far so good, so we're hovering around 200-250 FPS, and that is about where I would expect this hardware to sit. So I think I'm going to quit that there, and then we're going to go back into the desktop and wrap this up with some final thoughts of the XFCE version of Manjaro. Right, so I think that's about where I'm going to wrap it up, but that's been my updated and refreshed look of Manjaro's XFCE, this time with their most recent version of 21.0 Ornara. Now, much like their KDE version, I've very much enjoyed my little run through and playing around with things, and I think Manjaro just do a really good job at making Arch Linux a lot more accessible and user-friendly to new users. Now, if I had a choice between their XFCE version and their KDE version, the little bit of plasma bias in me would probably still go for the plasma version, but as far as desktop environments go, XFCE is a good one, and Manjaro has a very nice and well polished implementation of it out of the box. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe, and if you've really enjoyed it, you can sub to me on Patreon at patreon.com/TylersTech now, and also join the Discord. There's a link in the description. I'll see you on the next one. Bye bye.